Do you know Iraq's instability cannot be blamed on one single event? Historians agree that the country's foundations were fragile from the beginning. Because Iraq was created during the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, built from provinces with very different populations. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, like, and leave us a comment to help this channel grow. Thank you. Now let's go back how Britain created Iraq and why it never became stable. In 1916, two European diplomats sat in a room, looked at a map of the Middle East, and quietly drew lines across it. No elections, no local leaders, no permission from the millions of people living there, just rulers dividing lands they did not own. Those lines would later create Iraq, a country filled with different religions, different ethnic groups, different tribes, and different loyalties. And over the next 100 years, those lines would help ignite coups, civil wars, dictatorships, foreign invasions, terror groups, and the rise of ISIS. But here is the shocking part. Iraq was never meant to become a natural nation. It was built during the collapse of an empire, designed around oil, and shaped to protect British power. This is the story of how Britain created Iraq and why the country never truly became stable. To understand Iraq, we first need to go back centuries before Iraq even existed. For most of modern history, the land we now call Iraq was part of the Ottoman Empire. In 1534, the Ottoman Turks captured Baghdad from the Safavid Persians. Over time, the Ottomans organized the region into three major provinces: Mosul in the north, Baghdad in the center, Basra in the south. And this matters enormously, because these provinces were never designed to become one unified nation. Mosul was dominated by Kurdish populations, Sunni Arabs, Turkmen communities, Assyrian Christian. It looked north toward Anatolia and trade routes into modern Turkey and Syria. Baghdad became the political and administrative center. It was dominated largely by Sunni Arab elites connected to Ottoman administration. The city was strategically important because it sat near the Tigris River and major trade network. Basra in the south was different again. The population there was largely Shia Arab tribal, connected to the Persian Gulf. Basra's ports linked the region to India, Persia, the Gulf trade routes, and later to global oil markets. For centuries, these regions had different economies, identities, religious structures, tribal loyalties. There was no strong movement calling for a unified Iraqi nation. That idea would largely come later under British rule. At the start of the 20th century, Britain was the most powerful empire in the world. But British leaders feared something. Their empire depended heavily on naval dominance, trade routes, access to India. And by the early 1900s, a technological revolution was changing warfare. Oil was replacing coal. In 1911, Winston Churchill became First Lord of the Admiralty. He pushed Britain to convert its navy from coal-powered ships to oil-powered ships. Oil-made ships. Faster, more efficient, harder to detect at sea. But Britain had a major problem. It did not produce enough oil domestically, so British strategists became obsessed with securing oil supplies abroad. Then came a major discovery. In 1908, large oil reserves were discovered in Persia, modern Iran. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company was formed, and Britain quickly invested heavily. Suddenly, the Persian Gulf became one of the most strategically important regions on Earth. British officials now viewed Mesopotamia, the Ottoman territory that would later become Iraq, as critically important, not only because of geography, but because they suspected large oil reserves might exist there too. In August 1914, World War I began. A few months later, the Ottoman Empire joined Germany and Austria-Hungary against Britain, France, and Russia. Britain immediately worried about Persian Gulf oil installations, sea routes to India, Ottoman influence near British territories, so Britain acted quickly. British and Indian forces landed near Basra. Officially, their goal was limited: protect the oil facilities near Abadan in Persia, secure the Gulf, protect imperial trade routes. But once British troops entered Mesopotamia, their objectives expanded. By 1915, British commanders pushed north toward Baghdad, but the campaign nearly collapsed. At Kut al-Amara, Ottoman forces surrounded British troops for months. In April 1916, around 13,000 British and Indian soldiers surrendered. It became one of Britain's worst military defeats of the war. The defeat shocked London, but instead of withdrawing, Britain doubled down, because by then Mesopotamia had become too strategically important to lose. While the war continued, Britain and France secretly negotiated how to divide Ottoman territory after victory. The agreement became known as Mr. Sykes of Britain, François-Georges Picot of France. The agreement was signed in May 1916, and it would shape the future of the Middle East. Britain and France did not consult the people living there. No Arab representatives negotiated the borders. Instead, European diplomats divided regions according to imperial interests. France would dominate Syria, Lebanon. Britain would dominate southern Mesopotamia, areas near the Persian Gulf, routes connected to India. The agreement contradicted earlier British promises made to Arab leaders during the war, because at the same time Britain was secretly dividing the region with France. British officials were also encouraging Arab revolts against the Ottomans by implying Arabs would gain independence afterward. This contradiction would fuel distrust across the Middle East for generations.